And this is what we are going to play with. This is a circuit board for the Omega home computer, and this is version 1.4 of this board, and it's Sergey Kiselev who have made this. And I don't remember when I bought this PCB, but it's probably a little over a year ago. And in addition to this board, I also bought the keyboard PCB. And this keyboard, I have not checked the switches I have, but I do think that this will fit with the standard switches that I have. And this is version 1.1 of the keyboard PCB. And I'm not sure if I have everything that goes into this keyboard. I'm not sure if it's included in the original boom, but there is a boom for this project or a project list for this project on Moser, and I've used that as to take invoice of what inventory of what I got in my storage. And as far as this goes, I do have most of the active components, but I might lack some passives, and I do lack a lot of these connectors that's going into this, and I also lack the battery holder. But I'm going to walk you through the boom now, so that you can see for yourself what I got and what I don't get, and some tips for using what where. Before we start looking into the bill of materials, or boom as it's called, I'm going to give you a short overview of where I get information about this project. And this is the main GitHub page for this project. And yes, its nickname is Kiselev, and it's Sergey Kiselev that's made this project, and he has made many other projects too. I have made some of those projects before, the Micro 88, and some of his other builds is things that I have made before. And he has released this under GPL 3.0 license. That means that this is an open source project that other people can make changes to. But Sergey is the original author of this and should be credited anyway. And the work he has done for the community to reverse engineering and making some of the old computers available in this form is, it's very nice of him to put in the effort, and I think he should be praised for that. And here it's, as I said, his GitHub page, and a link to every information he has given about this is here, and this information is available both in English and in Spanish. And we have here some finished pictures of his build, and we can see he has made a really nice keyboard on top of this with printed keys and so on. And you also have some links to documentation, you have some schematics, and you have some other stuff here, and you also have some building instructions. And these can be nice to have. I'm not following these to the point, but it states which components you should put on first and so on. So I might follow some of this, but mostly it is common sense where you put on the lowest and lowest weight components first. But it's also nice to see that he has described some of the optional components, because some of the components is only needed if you want a cassette interface. I'm going to build that. And you also have to choose if your computer should be PAL or NTSC. And I'm going to build mine as a PAL version. And also on the MSX org page, this computer has got a very good description. And here they describe almost every MSX computer that's out there. And they have very throughout documentation of everything MSX. And here they also have provided some pictures and some additional information. And the rest of the things we are only going to find out of as we go. If everything works as is my intent, then we don't need to go into detail into everything. But you can see here that this is the 1.2 PCB. It's slightly different from the 1.3. And the 1.3 looks a lot like the 1.4 that we are building. But there are some bug fixes to this. But what we are going to look into is the build of materials, or bill of materials. And this is just done some copy pasting and getting into Excel for the list that is provided on the GitHub. And he has also uploaded project list to Moser, where he has picked Moser parts. Be aware that this list is not up to date with what is on stock on Moser, and there is also some of the components, especially the resistors, that you have to buy at least some thousand of to be able to order them on that number from Moser. The chips that's marked in the darkest green is things that I have ready at hand. The lighter green is where I have the chips, but there might be some other designations on the TTL chips. Let's say that I have LS or ALS or HC instead of HCT, that is stated on most of these. And of course the HCT is the preferable because they draw less current, but in most cases I do think that the LS chips will work just fine. And I do think that I ordered some of these from Moser. I can't really remember. No, I don't think I did. I think the 138 was the only one I ordered, because I didn't have many of those. I don't think I ordered any one of these. I could have ordered if I had just one or two laying around, but I did not, I think. And the things that's marked in yellow here is the things that I have ordered from Moser. All these capacitors is stuff that I normally have lying around, and that's not something I'm ordering now. That's something I order when I run out. The same with these resistors. There is one here that is pretty special, and that 20K resistor, where he has stated that it should be 1% tolerance. And I think I'm going to measure out if the ones I have is within this specification, but 1% tolerance is slightly more than it's normal. A metal film resistor has normally 2% accuracy, and coal film, that's the old normal variant, it has 5%. Yeah, it's the normal deviance that you have on these, but 1%, it's possible that I can take my 20Ks and I just measure them to see if they are within spec. I have not ordered them, at least. This relay I probably didn't need to order, but this is a special mini size relay, about the same I think that we had for the Retro Chip Tester Pro, where I did this special butch job and put in some larger relays and some inductors here that I didn't have. It's also so that some of these is only required here if I have the 9938, but I don't. I have the 9955, so that means that I don't need Q2, but this is transistor that I have. The polyfuse, I do have something that's almost the same, and this was also not in stock on Moser. The DB9s for joystick ports and stuff, I do have the exact same kind, but because this is the kind that does not fit on a CBM64 board, so I have a lot of those. Yeah, a lot of the connectors here, they are special with the pinouts that's selected on this board, so I have ordered them to be on the safe side, and also the 50-pin edge connector for the cartridge I've ordered. And I've ordered two of the same kind, so that means that this is not the 90-degree angled one, it's the one that's pointing straight upwards. I also ordered a battery holder because I haven't got a CR2032 holder that's of this kind. And also the 9955 chip has 1.78 millimeter spacing between the pins, the legs, and I don't have that kind of socket in stock, so I ordered this one from it stands here that you order from eBay, but I did find one that I do think fits on Moser. It was quite expensive, but they had it, so I ordered it from there. And they also state that DigiKey has some pin strips that has the same spacing that can be used. Worst case, you just have to solder the chip straight onto the board, but I won't do that if I can avoid it. And the same, this chip here, It's the Sony chip that has a 40 spacing instead of 30 or 60. That's the normal with these sockets. And here it states that you can just cut the socket in the middle if you don't have this socket, or you can use some pin leads that has the right pitch, but you just use them instead of the socket. Yeah, and all the rest of the sockets, it's standard run of the mill, and them I have. So this is what is needed to build this. And the only integrated circuit that I know for sure I don't have is the 512K flash ROM. And this flash ROM, I ordered it from eBay and from AliExpress. They had some rather cheap on both places, and I voted for a combination of low price and fast delivery. So I do not hold my breath till they show up here, but it's possible that I can use a 512K EEPROM instead. I just have to reconfigure a couple of pins to make that work. And it's also stated that this boom is for the version 1.1 of the PCB, but I do hope that it fits my version 1.4, that it's not some of the sockets or other things that's new on this version, and that the documentation is not updated. So what I will do now is I will just start to pick out these capacitors and these resistors and start soldering them onto the board along with this diode. And I will take the low components first. So I will after that take the IC sockets to make ready for the placement of the chips. So that's what I will be doing now. I will start to pick out resistors and place them on the board as I go along. Yeah, this assortment resistor box I bought from the Swedish company Comvol way back in the day. I think this was bought in 1988 or 89, and I've had it since, and this is the E12 series of resistor, but I have added some extras in here. I just number the pages and I take away the page with the ICs on, as I won't be needing that until I'm going to place the ICs in the sockets. It's the sockets that goes on the PCB. Yeah, the resistor arrows is marked in yellow and I have to order them, but the resistor seems to be arranged from biggest to smallest, as it starts with a 1 mega ohm resistor. The 1 mega ohm resistors here, all the resistors probably in this is now replaced with China parts, so I will measure them all to see if they are the right value or about the right value. This is a sheet multimeter, and you can see here that this is about 1 mega ohm. To get to know the board and get the feel for the layout, I will start by placing out all the components as I find them. And find them is the keyword here, because this is sorted, as I said, from the largest to the smallest resistor, and it's not sorted in any way as the layout of the board is sorted like this or anything. It's chaotic, to put it at least. It's no relevance to the numbers of the coordinates of the boards or anything, so you have to search and search for every component that you have to place on this board. But happily, both the values and the number of the components are stated on each part. And at last I find it, but hopefully every new component will take shorter time because the holes will be filled out as I go along. And I use my usual method of just bending the legs when I have placed in the component to make that it don't fall out. And this quality of this PCB is okay, and there is just enough space for the resistors. Yeah, at least I have one advanced with the sorting of the resistors being from the highest to the least. It's that all the components will be easier to take out of my sortiment box as they are sorted the same way. As I said, I will measure every component as I go along to make sure that they are within spec, but this multimeter is no good way of doing accurate measurement for resistors. You can see that it's counting very slow, and it also seems to be a bit inaccurate. It could be the measurement leads that's not the best, but they should not give this kind of differences in the kilo ohm area. The resistance in the measurement lead should be negligible in this area, as they are less than 1 1 ohm. And you can see that this cheap China resistor also should be 1% accuracy, and that is clearly is not. And now it's back to playing resistor hide and seek with this board. And this is getting old real fast. I have to search and search and search. And this is just a tenth of the time that this really took to find this resistor. And that the values keep jumping all over the place is not a good way to do a board like this. But of course this is an open source project, but it's miles away from the Retro Chip Tester Pro, where you have the interactive map of the component layout. So that's 3 down, 45 more to go. And I'm showing you this in 10 times the speed. And I do actually find the resistors anyway. And as long as you have looked into the board, the 10th time, the 20th time, you start to remember some of the component values that you have seen on the board. So each resistor takes less time than the one before it. But even though it's going faster, I'm changing tactics. You might remember me showing you a different system before. At least it appears to be faster. Yeah, here I've used my usual system and pierced the resistors through the paper. And I'm going to place the rest of the resistor like that. And I also the 1N4148 diode. And this is from a really old supply. I had this since 1989, I think. And I've not done this yet, because here it said that R9 should be 16K and 1%. So I'm going to use my fluke scope meter and some other multimeter to measure this, because this is far too it's measuring all over the place on the resistor, it seems. So I'm going to use the fluke scope meter and test this out to see that I get this right. So I'm just going to place these components and I'm going to solder them in afterwards. And I will also do the rest of the placing of the resistors in 10 times speed. But as you can see, it's actually going faster and faster for each resistor, and that's 2 reasons for that. 1, I'm getting to know the board better, and 2, of course, there is less and less places to place the resistors as I fill them up. But the capacitor places looks just the same as the resistors until you read the values. That's not totally true, of course. At least the resistors and the coils and inductors look the same, but the capacitors do have the hole inside the box. But otherwise they're tightly packed, so it's not very easy to spot the difference until you read the values. And I'm using this solder, and this is with lead, and it's 0.81 millimeter thick, and it's very high degree of rosin in this. So you see here it's 64. And it's 5 core with rosin inside this. So this actually will clean out anything quite good, and you can see that the rosin is doing its job on the PCB when you are soldering. And I'm going to use my old school Weller for this job. This is the one I normally use when I build stuff like this. It's very old, but it's also very reliable, and this is temperature controlled by the tip. So the tip is a so-called magnetostat that the magnet is keeping in touch when the temperature is low, and it's slipping the heat element when it's high, so that it keeps about a constant temperature. And this is a bit thick, but it's perfect for this kind of soldering where you have kind of enough space around the feet of the components, and you also have quite some holes to fill in the board. And as you probably understand, it's now time to do some soldering, but for those of you who hope to see the whole job, I'm sorry to disappoint you or maybe make you happy. I actually lost a lot of footage here, so I only have about the first part of the soldering and no part where I did the very good explaining on how to cut the wires. So that we have to take next time. The main reason why this soldering iron is so much better than all my other ones when you are doing this kind of job is that you can go as fast as you like, you won't get any cooling of the tip. With all my other soldering guns, even though they have more wattage than this one, the tip has less mass and it cools easier. So if you want to keep up the pace and solder as fast as you can, also when you have large ground planes, you have to have a tip and a soldering iron that's more massive than the more modern types. I'm starting now with the capacitors, and to help me out with that I'm going to use the PeakTech 2170 Pro, and I do have this bag, should be 100 nanofarad capacitors, and to measure them out you're just going to clip on these leads like so, and it measures out 99.98 nanofarad, and you can also just push them in like so in the contacts here, and they measure about the same. It's the measurement leads that comes in the way. So I can just disconnect these leads. That's mostly meant for measuring in circuit, and I just take all my capacitors, because this is China caps and I don't trust them. They could be missorted, they could be mismarked, and they could be destroyed. 93, 101. I've never experienced that's 101. 97, 97, 99, and I'm going to need, I think it was 50 of these. I'm not totally sure. I'm taking a look here. Capacitor was this list. Yeah, it was 58 of these, so that's going to take me a while. Before, when I've tested the capacitors, the multifunction tester was the easiest way to go, but the peak meter takes a lot less time, as you don't have to wait for it to boot each time you do a new measurement. And the measurements are also far more accurate, and you can read with more values, of course. But the biggest thing is that the peak meter can measure all kinds of capacitor values, while the multifunction tester can't measure big capacitors. As you probably saw, mostly of these are underachievers, but is that really a problem? I don't think so. This was an overachiever, but the problem is that if you have high current draw, because this stands as decoupling capacitors over all the TTL chips, and if you have fast changes in from high to low and low to high, there will be some current spikes. But we are mostly using HCT logic, and it draws a little current that I do think that 100 nanos on this is overkill. So I don't think it matters much if it's some underperformers here. And I won't bother picking any other capacitors until all these are placed and soldered on the board. The reason for that is the same as with the resistors. When 58 of the holes for the capacitors is filled out, it's much easier to see where the rest of them goes. And these are quite easy to fit. There is at least one of them along each IC and on some other strategic places. And they are also in other networks with resistors and stuff all over the board. But placing them will be the easy task, and this is not something that will take a long time. That took a little bit of time, but it was very easy, and now we just have to solder them in place. And here I will give you a little taste of what it's like soldering on my workbench. The fumes from the soldering is very toxic, especially the smoke from the rosin. And I do want to keep my lungs clean, so you can hear this sound. This is the fans that's going all the time when I do soldering. So I almost have to have my ear protections on when I do this. And I will turn it up now so that you can hear it with the same volume as my voice with the same microphone. Quite disturbing, isn't it? Yeah, real nice to get rid of that noise. Now we have finished soldering all of the 58 caps, so we are just now going to cut the leads afterwards. Oh, I almost forgot, I lost my footage where I explained this earlier. When you cut with these sharp scissors, it's very important that you don't cut too close to the board. So that's why it's wise to hold the cutter at an angle to the board, so that you are cutting a bit up on the legs. You should not cut into the solder, only on the bare part of the metal. And I've seen some accidents where you actually have cut off almost all the solder, and it was impossible to make a good soldering joints afterwards when you had to repair that on the board because the legs was just too short. Ta-da! So it's the sockets next. That might come as a surprise. I was in the middle of doing capacitors, but I do realize that I'm missing some of the caps. I will wait for my order to come from to Moser before I do the rest of the caps, I think. And it's also so that I do have the box with the sockets right in front of me, so that's why I'm doing the sockets now. And I'm doing what I have of sockets. I'm going to do some dual swipe sockets, and I'm going to do some sockets with the round holes. And I'm using what I have, so it's not a preference for one kind of the another. I normally use the round sockets when I do repair work, as they are much better to place chips that has been used and when there are solder on the legs of the chips. Here it's all new chips, so a double swipe socket will do just fine, no worries. But one thing's for sure, the sockets with the round holes, you can't bend the legs, so you have to solder them in to make them stick to the board. And here I'm getting overconfident and placing too many sockets before I actually try to solder them in. And I do use the keyboard PCB to turn the board, but it's not going very well. So I am back to using my old school method from before. I just turn the board up about 45 degrees and solder 1 or 2 pins before I am able to turn the board and make the socket stick better to the board. And as you can see, it's not that much more time consuming, and you can see the results right away that the sockets are sticking to the PCB. There are just 2 things to make sure of when you are soldering sockets onto a PCB, and that is 1, place them the right way so that you have the notch pointing towards the notch on the PCB, and you also have to make sure that the socket is flush with the PCB so that you are not going to get a very crooked looking boards afterwards. You also could get some space issues if you don't have the socket flush with the board. That's the socket, and IC on top of it builds quite a lot of height. And in some cases it was not meant for the IC to be put in a socket, so it's wise to keep the height as low as you can. And normally it's enough to just push the PCB towards your bench or something when you solder the socket, and that is why you place the components in order of height, so that you will not have problems with sockets falling out of their holes because you have placed a lot of higher components around them. Of course, there are ways through that too, and I've shown you some of them earlier. You can use a sponge or something and push the board against to actually push the sockets into the board when you are soldering. So there are a lot of ways around that too. Yeah, here I just speed up the process to 10 times speed. There is nothing new in the next sockets we are soldering in. I am able to fill all the sockets, even the Sony chip, which has 40 spacing instead of 30. And the only chip that I'm not able to solder in is the socket for the V9955 that has a 1.78mm spacing. And that socket is ordered from Moser and will arrive with the rest of the components sometimes in the end of next week, I think. Until then, I will go through the rest of my components, the electrolytic caps and the other capacitors, to make out what I have laying in stock and what needs to be picked from elsewhere. And I might release a short video on that. Otherwise, I think we call it quit with this one, and say that we will continue this series with completing this build, and I might also do an in-between here with the keyboard. I have to see if the keyboard switches I have, if they fit on this PCB. So, until next time, thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, and I am grateful for every comment you make. It will only make the channel better. So until next time, thanks for watching and hope to see you in my next video.